I promise it's so intense that the programming committee said we have to break it up in half. So we'll have a coffee break in the middle. So a couple programmatic things before I get started. Thank you for the committee for inviting me. I wasn't sure if Americans were still welcome in Canada, given everything that's going on. Certain ones, okay. Well, I appreciate that. I must be in the upper crust then. Over the years, who are my non-NMC members? For a moment, can you put your hands up? So I was just thinking this morning, I've been a member and I attended my first meeting in 2005, which I think was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And one of the things that I've appreciated over the years is that there's always presentations or posters or discussions between sessions that challenge you and they move you off your base. They challenge your way of thinking about things. And that's my goal for today. And that's kind of what the program committee challenged me to do, is provide a little bit different perspective on making milk quality, making high quality milk in robots and getting outside the box and doing some things that maybe we're not doing right now. We're looking at things in a way that we're not currently looking at them. So in the US, we have a saying that we'll sell you the entire seat, but you'll only need the edge. So hopefully we can keep it interesting. I know it's early in the morning, but bear with me. I do, by the way, I expect a lot of audience participation just based on the topic, and I am going to challenge some things. So please, all questions are on the table. I'm not going to say I know everything about robotic milking, but quite a few of my clients have put in some larger robotic installations, and I've had the opportunity to do a lot of testing and consulting on those facilities. So this, let's see if I can get my pointer right. This is a milking robot. It happens to be a Giamano box robot. And it doesn't matter to me what color or brand you like or might have at home or is common in your practice. I have no preference. I'm going to analyze the big three. So green, blue, and red. We won't even call them by name. This happens to be a Giamano box. So I want you to tell me what the difference is between this and this. Who knows what this is? I have it listed up there. So do we remember side opener parlors? Tandem style parlors like this? I had to look really hard to find this picture. There are not a lot left. I'm going to say that this is not actually a lot different than this when it comes to a milking stall. And I'm going to challenge us even further. I'm going to say that this is a Gia, a green, and a Lele, a red, is not a lot different from this. This is a weigh jar milking system, okay? If you look, there's a lot of similarities. And if you do milking equipment analysis, you do vacuum graphing, there's a lot of similarities if you've graphed on these type of systems and these type of systems in the numbers that we see. So I'm going to make a bold statement to start out of the gate to keep you engaged. The factors that drive milk quality in robots are the exact same as they are in a conventional parlor facility. There's no difference between them. We can list them. We can debate which ones should be on the list and which ones aren't, but what gets you good milk quality in a parlor or a tie stall is going to get you good milk quality in a robot in general. And when I look at robots, this is not a knock on robots. Robots are the future, and you might interpret some of the things I say as being negative on robots. They're not. In the US, in Canada, and in Europe, they're becoming the norm, okay? So as factors change, we're adopting more technology. I want to move that technology along, okay? So when it just comes to the milking aspects, they are actually very similar to older parlors, and they are not very well plumbed, okay? So things like milk path are not taken into good consideration, and that has impacts on how we milk cows. They do, however, definitely lessen the labor, which is the big selling point in the US. We utilize a lot of hired labor, and so there's frustrations that go with that, training aspects that go with that, and they do offer a lot more data. And so how can we maximize those two inputs? So this is my list of factors that lead to good milk quality. Again, we can debate what's on there, but in general, if you take care of the list on the left and you take care of the list on the right, we generally have good milk quality. And even sometimes we can get away with not having one or two of those things on that list if we do really well in some of the others. Again, In the herds I work with, I don't see any difference between a robot and a conventional parlor milk cow if we can provide these things. So the talk could end there, right? It could be, oh, there's no difference. But that's not 100% the case. There's some difference here. And so, again, another bold statement. If you look at some people, and I think Jack Rodenberg is in the room, we have made great progress on the cow handling side, the facility design side, the robot arm itself. We have not progressed the actual milking of the cow that much in these robotic systems. And so when I talk to my producers, and I just spent some time in Nova Scotia with Don Anderson, when I talk to the producers, if you distill what they tell you, they're just so darn happy that they don't have to, pick your bullets from that list, either live on a schedule, perform a repetitive job, or work with people, work with labor. They're willing to make some compromises, and that could be compromises in expenses, meaning robotic milking is still an expensive way to milk a cow. It could mean that we forget some of the things that we used to do in a parlor setting, and we'll get into that later. That's not unique to dairymen, by the way. Veterinarians, consultants, we're guilty of that as well, and we're willing to pay more to do it. There are good reasons for that. But we need to graduate from caring that the cow got milked, meaning that we can milk our 60 cows or 65 cows, to how those cows get milked. So, as I look around the US and Canada, so the North American market, I don't see a lot of people out there doing what we would consider conventional milking equipment testing on robots on a regular basis. And when I talk to dealerships, and again, it doesn't matter which brand, I'm showing a picture of a DeLaval here, but the brand doesn't matter. In general, the dealerships are not that well trained on testing milking equipment. In fact, we have there's a preconceived notion that this is a modular unit. We put it in, we put the plug in the wall, fire it up, and that's it. It works. These are your settings. You don't need anything different. And we know that's not the case. Every herd has different goals. Every herd has a little bit different cows. And certainly most of these companies would be, the three I'll talk about primarily are European companies. And so they're very influenced by European-style milking, European-style cows. North American is not exactly the same, right? So we need to be aware of that. And I think one of the reasons that we do not see veterinarians and consultants, extension agents, take your pick, advisors on dairies, out working with robots more is what you see here. When I look at this, you have to be very confident in what you're doing. And in fact, I got to spend some time tracing things and looking at valves and thinking about exactly what happens where. To me, this is harder to test than an 80-stall rotary. I can jump on and do an airflow analysis on an 80-stall rotary with less thinking involved. Now, maybe it's because I've done more of it than I can this. Okay? It's a daunting thing to look at and then say, I want to jump in and I want to test this. Because you're assuming some risk when you do that, right? And it's not just the plumbing. You have to know how to operate the computer to even put it into a test mode that you can do that test. Okay, so there's a lot of barriers to us doing things that we would consider normal in a parlor. And so I think we can't use that as an excuse not to look, though. It just means we have to up our game. So I'll use this as another example. This is just one of my robot dairies that I work with. This is the combination of tank valves. How easy is it to do a clean-in-place analysis for this dairy? It's far more complicated than it would be for a conventional system. If I go to a tie stall barn and I do a wash analysis versus here, it takes a lot more thinking and a lot more knowledge to inspect this system or to test this system. And we just commissioned a 24 box Gia barn, so a really big dairy. And if you look at all the valving they have, you need to get out a schematic sheet and look through, okay, what goes where and which valves need to be engaged and which valves need to be disengaged. It's daunting. I don't want to do a wash analysis on that barn. I told the owner, I said, I hope you never have a bacteria count problem because it's going to take me 6 times as long to do it. And I'll spend most of that time in the office trying to figure out where I want to test or where I can take samples. So we have to think about these things and at the dealership level, at the veterinarian level, and consultant level, we need more training. I'll say at the dairyman level too, because there are a lot of places where robots are being sold where you're a long way from your service provider. Okay, so you need to know how these things operate and how you're going to work with them. This is another brand. This is Gia. I'm only saying this, I'm using this picture to point out, this is the Canadian model. If you go to the US, it's even worse because we have more requirements. So there's additional valves that go on there, and it gets even more complicated. So just tracing the plumbing is a big task with robots. So we hit on some negative things. It's not all negative. Certainly you can make high quality milk with robots. Undoubtedly you can make high quality milk in robotic systems. So what are the advantages that we have? Okay, what can we leverage? Number one, first and foremost, everything that we know about cows, whether it's the environment you put them in, the feeding, the people, the handling, cows respond to consistency. And robots have that in spades, right? They have consistency all day long. We can argue whether that's good in some situations, but if they're nothing else, they're consistent. One of the things for me, so I deal with a lot of labor, this doesn't seem like something you would think about at first, but if you 3-teat a cow in your herd, and 3-teated cows are valuable, that's not up for debate for me. I'm not saying we should run out and 3-teat lots of cows, but they still have value. If you do that, we always worry that some employee is going to reattach that quarter, and we're going to get high counts from that. When you program a robot not to milk a quarter, it never milks that quarter again. It never touches it, right? So just things like that are you cannot get that level of precision with an employee model, a human model. And it doesn't matter if you are an owner-operator. You make mistakes, things happen, you're in a hurry, the unit next to you fell off, whatever it is, there are things that happen. We also have a lot of technology at our disposal. Quarter milk volume takeoff is good. We can leverage that. We need to talk about takeoff settings, and that's a whole nother presentation in itself. I'm not going to even tackle that today. But when you get the settings right, quarter takeoff is a huge advantage to us. Backflush, I think that has a lot of value. And you know, if you look at the western United States, where I do a lot of my consulting, many of those herds have backflush, and it's been helpful. We have conductivity. I'm not sure that's the best measure for finding clinical cows, but we have it, and we can use it. There are different applications we can use that for. Perhaps even in a selective dry cow therapy program, right? So if you have data every day, you can probably build that into some algorithm to decide should we treat that cow or not. And then you got other, I'll call miscellaneous, weight, rumination, milk temperature. Cow health and milk quality, especially somatic cell count, go hand in hand. So if we can better manage cow health, we can get better milk quality. They also offer the benefit of timing. The cow makes the decision in a robotic milking dairy, and we entice her to do that. Right? So we offer her an incentive, please come and be milked. Or we'll get into this later, but we either lead with the carrot or the stick. Okay, so at any rate, she picks when she can be milked. In theory, at least that should lead to less milking cow or less leaking cows because they should respond somewhat to udder pressure. That's in theory. I've seen different posts recently on some pages on Facebook with robotic milking brands where herds are struggling with that. Some of that might come back to teat end health, might come back to some other factors, facility factors for sure. And then one that shouldn't be downplayed too much is that there's no person moving those cows. A significant portion of the injuries we see on dairies where it's a cow splits, a cow goes down, that's from handling that was inappropriate. And so not only does it lead to decreased injuries on the dairies that I work with, but it creates less slips and less splash. So those are good milk quality factors. There are potential drawbacks. We know these. When I was prepping for this talk, I read a lot of the manuscripts from other presentations that have been done, and they say the same things. We hammer these, and I'm going to try and take a different tack on them for you. Teat cleaning is the one that you hear about the most. So as they say, okay, it doesn't know if the cow's dirty or not. It can only clean the cow one way, and that's it. I've never met a farm that has more than one employee that they clean. In fact, I'll even say I've never met a farm where every cow gets cleaned, you know, to the point where she's perfectly clean. It doesn't happen. So we're not perfect. We're not robots either. Post-dip coverage, that is a real deal, and we'll talk about some things we can do with that. We have limited liner choices across all the brands, and that's getting better. Canada has a huge advantage there over us. By the way, I want to go home with some ketoprofen because we don't have that in the U.S. So I would love to tell my guys, hey, we have to do pain management on everything, and Dr. Skippin is right on. But in the U.S., we deal with different factors than you would in Canada. And then the complex plumbing, which we talked about, a lot of that comes back to what we would call in a parlor milk path. So how well are we able to get milk away from the cow? So this is the classic one. I said teat cleaning and robots. This is one of the studies, but there's a lot out there. It says if you give the robot a clean cow, you get a clean teat. Well, that's not noteworthy news. That's the same with people. If I give a parlor full of clean cows to an employee, lo and behold, I'm going to get clean teat ends at the end. And if I give them really dirty cows because we want to get done and we got to keep moving, we end up with dirty teat ends. So what I want to challenge us with is, okay, we know this. What are the things in our power to do about it besides we got to get cleaner cows? And then it's not an excuse not to look, right? So in a parlor setting, we do things like score filter socks. Okay, how many of you work with dairies, own dairies, whatever, and throw the filter socks away and don't even look at them? So this is a dairy that I work with, and these are different robots, and you can argue these are all dirty, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but there's obviously variation between this one and that one, and that one. So what's different about those robots? We should be looking at that, because I can tell you the housing is exactly the same. This is just another view of the same dairy where we're looking at this. So I want this robot. This one has our mastitis cows, so we do segregate, so throw that one out. But I want this robot. I don't want this robot. Does that impact somatic cell count and bacteria counts and the traditional milk quality factors? You bet. It sure does. I do teat end swabs at my dairies because we know how clean the teat end is at the time of attachment has a major impact on new infection risk of cows. So you can't see this very well. It's a little bit off the screen, but this is one pod of robots. So they're in pods of 2. This is the other pod. So of the 5 you can see here versus the large group here, which one do you want? Would you rather have this one? I would. We don't do these because we like that robots separate people from the cow. And I'll add in that there's some peril to doing this, right? That's not a lightly taken thing. If cows aren't used to being touched, and especially if the milking characteristics aren't right, they can get pretty ornery about having their teats touched. So we shouldn't take the risk lightly, but also we should be looking at the results that we're getting. We know this drives milk quality, but we don't look at it because we're willing to accept it because it's robots and we don't have to milk the cow, right? So I'm going to have you read the manuscript for a lot of these. I've got some detail in here. I don't want to cover it real thoroughly because I want to be sure we have enough time for discussion. But with the DeLaval, they're prepping in a cup, and that's you either have a cup or brushes, one of those solutions. They're using a combination of a wash solution plus or minus a germicide, and then some combination of atmospheric air and compressed air. If you are out in the field and you're doing consulting, I'm told by DeLaval that medium is the common setting that you see, and if you run it through a test prep, you should be able to catch that solution. It should be about 1 liter that you catch, okay? If you do this after it's prepped a cow, it's obviously going to be more because they're diverting milk with that wash solution. But you can catch it and you can measure it. If you can set it to be higher, and so the challenge with that is, are you going to have a wet teat? You can set it to be lower, and the challenge would be, are you going to have a clean teat? There is a setting in there as well, and I'm not sure how much I would recommend this or not, but they tell me they can actually go around a second time to prep the cow, and they are, the DeLaval people are telling me that's in there for an alley laying cow. So if you have a real dirty cow, you can program it for an individual ID, and it'll prep that cow twice. So this is just some video of what goes on in the cup. This is a clear teat plug. It's a vortex. If you look inside, they've got a perforated sleeve inside that cup. And so this is the drying action going on now. It'll run through a second cycle here in a minute. And so that's how they're cleaning cup. I apologize for the movement. It's actually quite a vigorous vigorous cleaning action. So also, if you're trying to take video of this, which I wouldn't recommend, this is about the third video we shot because the first two ended up with a lot of water on my phone. So it has quite a bit of pressure behind it. So if we look at the red brand now, if you look at Lely, they're utilizing brushes for prep. That has advantages and disadvantages. So they've got a pair of side-by-side air-driven brushes. They do have options though, okay? And I know some of these companies aren't eager to tell you all the options that they have, but when you purchase robots, they should, okay? I think you should be able to know what you can do with them, and we should be willing to acknowledge that not every dairy is going to be the same. Especially if you make some other considerations that we'll talk about later, you might need a little bit better prep. If you have that nice sand barn that Dr. Skippen showed, maybe you don't need to make changes to prep. Maybe the basic is going to be good enough for you. In the US, we're so special, we have our own teat cleaning option in the Lely model. So we think we're special, we get our own teat cleaning option. It's essentially the brushes come out a second time, they get sprayed, they go back in and do another round. This is very good for milk letdowns. I'm going to be quite honest with you. In a parlor setting, again, something that we know that we're willing to forget, the more stimulation you provide, the better the milk letdowns are, the faster the milk outs are. So I won't argue to do this. It's going to take more time on the prep side. But again, going back to a parlor, we know that you got to slow down to speed up, right? So if you're having some trouble with bimodal milks, if you're having some trouble with long milking cows, a little bit of extra stimulation doesn't hurt things. There's another option on there called X-Prep. It gives you some lateral movement. So it's not just straight out, it's down into the sides. They've got several X-Prep settings in there, and they basically account for how long the teats are in your herd. So you don't want to pull the brush completely off the teat end. So again, you can go back to your manuals if you have them, or you can talk to a dealer about what those different ones are, but I recommend this. That's the difference between the two sets of swabs I showed you in the picture before, by the way. If you do the regular two brushes, the teat sits in between here, and you actually don't get a lot of cleaning on the teat end, which, again, this is debatable, but in my experience, the teat end is the most important real estate that we have to clean. So we want to be able to get that teat end clean. There's also a brush height adjustment, so you can change the offsets. I'm going to show you why that's important here. So this is a cow being prepped at a dairy I work with. So when you don't get that right, the brush stops, right? So it crawls up the teat and it's going to stop. And so obviously when the brush isn't turning, there's no cleaning involved. I'm not a huge, if you talk to Lely and the little bit European model, they're into washing the udder floor. Again, that might have value. That has some value probably. I'd rather just keep the udders nice and singed and clipped like this and worry about cleaning the teat. The Green brand, they've got a really cool and innovative way of prepping cows if you've never seen it. They're doing all the functions within the single teat cup that they milk in. So they'll do the attachment, the stimulation, the cleaning, forestripping, all the way through to the teat dipping. And they're going to provide stimulation by what we would call back in the day stimipulse. So just an elevated pulsation rate and at a lower vacuum. They've got some programmable things in there too. I know less about the GIAs. As I said, I just started up my first barn a few months ago, so it's been a learning curve, just like any of you know who started up new robot dairies. There is some discussion, and I'll address it right out of the gate, about dumped milk with the GIA robot. So in the US, we're required to, we use the milk to flush the teat dip and debris out of the lines, in theory the debris out of the lines. And so we have to divert some more milk there. I'm unsure of the impact of that because I think you can milk more cows with this robot, so it's a balance. And I encourage you, if you're thinking about it, to just weigh that. And I think it does a good job at some things, and I think being upfront about that you're going to dump a little bit more milk, but you can milk a few more cows. My guys in the US are going to gravitate toward milking more cows every day of the week, so we don't care that much. In Canada, it's not much of an issue because your default is 3 seconds here, so it's not much diverted milk. So if you haven't seen the GIA robot arm, this is it in action. My question is, where does the debris go? Right? So that's a great example. This is from the GIA website. So we've got straw on those teats. The dairy that I do have that's running GIAs, I will be upfront, their bacteria counts have been phenomenal, and I'm very surprised by that. I will say our filter socks don't always look phenomenal, but our bacteria counts, my cooperative that I work with has incredibly high quality standards. And because of the products that we make, and we can talk about that later, but we can't have high bacteria count milk. It just doesn't work for us. And so we were a little bit concerned, and to date they've been doing fine. This, I apologize, these pictures didn't show up that well, but I'm going to transition now to talking about teats. I don't think we look at teats in general after milking, and I see quite a few issues on robot milk dairies. Yeah, obviously this one's pretty blunt. That's a really rough teat end, score 4 or very rough. This is the one that didn't show up that well. The top of the teat is purple here. It's blue. You can see it a little better on the screen, I think. Essentially, we know that cow didn't get milked very comfortably. And it's not that she has such a small teat or, a misshaped udder. It's actually a pretty shapely udder. But we tend to run high mouthpiece chamber vacuums with some of the European liners. And that's by design, okay? That's not a fault or a flaw. You can debate whether it's a flaw, but it's by design. That's how the European style liners are designed. I see this on dairies. These are Gia liners, just so we don't think I'm picking on any one brand. These are warped mouthpieces, okay? So one of the things I see on robot dairies is we tend to wait for the alarm to go off, right? Before we do maintenance. Oh, time to change liners. Well, I can promise you, unless you stand around and listen for squawks, you're not going to hear them, and a lot of dairies don't. Robot dairies don't. This has an impact. We were able to graph this, and I didn't throw the graphs in here, but it has an impact on the way we milk cows. We know that. If this was in your parlor, you'd probably be chewing the dealer a new one because the liners didn't last, okay? But you got to look for it, and if you don't look for it, you're never going to find it. This is, I'm going to toss this out there because liners are the new vogue on robots, so making liner changes. This is a dairy that I work with. In full disclosure, this is back 2 years ago. We put clover liners on a Lely shell. That is not a practice I recommend, but I hear about it happening, and it's situationally probably okay, but we need to be aware as consultants, dealers, whoever's doing that, this shell is not engineered for that liner, okay? So factors like liner stretch are going to be different. And I'm far more comfortable with engineered solutions. There are a few out on the market. This one, I was very upfront with the dairyman. We were in a situation where we needed to make a change, and we did not have other options. And it's worked out well, but I think it's the results you see here are going to be variable when you do those type of things. This is to point out this photo from David Reed, so I can't take credit for it, but again, Lely shells. All the manufacturers have different shells, and it can get confusing, and when you go to a robot, you need to be sure of what shell they have. So here you can see 3 different ones. DeLaval has different length shells. They have 2. Gia's got a few different length shells, so just be aware of what you're working with before you make some changes or recommend a different liner. Want to give photo credit here, obviously Don Anderson. Again, I said we don't look at teats enough. This is strip yields. Again, there's some perils to doing strip yields, but if you don't do it, you're really never going to know. And there's a lot of overmilked cows on robots because we don't check it. And you can save box time, you can save free time, you can milk more cows, so you can have better teat ends. It's a win-win-win, guys, it really is. This is just teat condition. I've heard rumors that it gets cold in Canada in the winter. Can someone confirm? So the teat condition is a big deal. Again, if you don't look, you're not going to see that. A little bit touchier subject. When I see milk quality issues, a lot of the ones I'm seeing now are what I call from producer considerations. The biggest one for me is that robots, from a labor saving standpoint, still don't pencil out economically. And so to justify them, we make other decisions. We compromise other areas to justify going to robotic milking because we want to do that. And it's a good way to milk cows. And so some of these tend to be how we do our stalls and how we bed and how we move manure. And another one that I see is hot water capacity. We should always be oversizing our hot water capacity because if you have enough hot water, your bacteria counts in general usually are pretty good. So these are alley scrapers. I see a lot of those in robot dairies for good reason. You don't want to go in with equipment and get cows up because the pen is never going to be empty. So there are things we can do to make that better. This is I'll give credit to Mason-Dixon Dairy. This is theirs, but there are other models out there. It's just a trench. You can see how dry the alleys are. They're pulling all of the fluid into the trench. It drains away, and they've got a flume that runs the length of the barn. So, I mean, reasonably clean cows on a mattress with only a little bit of bedding. But these are some of the dairies that I have to work with on milk quality. I say have to. I enjoy working with them, but these are the challenges we face because we decided bedding was expensive, and having people to bed added to our labor cost. And if you don't put bedding out there, you don't have to groom the stalls, right? So there's that savings. And so Dr. Skippen would point out we get more hock lesions with this. So we know it compromises cow care, but also it compromises cow cleanliness. And so just another example of that. So I'm a big fan of bedding retainers. That's a good compromise. You can keep a little bit of bedding on the mattress without keeping a lot of bedding on the mattress. Even better, you can put sand on top of a mattress, and that works. For those of you who speak Spanish, muy bueno. The cows are clean. You can see here, I will say this dairy just put these in, so the hock lesions haven't gone away. That takes time. But you can see the cows have cleaned up, and so that's helped milk quality in these herds. So I like to close my presentations with a little bit of a shot over the bow. And this will dovetail into what Dr. Skippen talked about earlier. Our two jobs are very similar, just with different entities. So Select Milk is a cooperative. We have producer members. We market milk to a lot of the same groups that Saputo does. And so I have the same discussions with both consumers and retailers and processors that he would. He raised some points, and I think one of the things that makes us the most uncomfortable as human beings is the discussion of ethics. And so I'm going to throw out an ethical consideration here with robots. If you look at most companies' animal care platforms, they're centered around something called the 5 freedoms. And so I'm showing you a picture here of what we would refer to as guided cow traffic in a robot setting. Guided cow traffic, by definition, is going to control access to one or two of the 5 freedoms that we say a cow should have, and they're considered freedoms. So consumers, by and large, the panels that I've talked to, are less interested in what we do, but they're very interested in why we do it. What are our motives? What do we want to do? I would argue that our motive here is that we don't want to have any fetch cows. And so we're going to put these systems in place so we don't have to have labor, because we know that they don't pencil out on labor. We don't want to fetch a cow, so we're going to put these systems in. But by doing that, we fail to consider how it impacts anybody but ourselves. This impacts cows. The data suggests that it doesn't change how much a cow eats, but it does change how often she eats. And I promise you, if you're putting a new fresh heifer into this facility, it's going to take her a little bit of time to figure out those gates and figure out how to get to food, figure out how to get to a bed. And so I'm going to challenge us when we install these things. Ethically, we have to consider, because milk quality, if you asked a consumer, and Dr. Skippen did a good job with this too, consumers don't know there's bacteria in milk. They don't want to think about that. They have no idea what a somatic cell count is. So what you and I think of as milk quality, that doesn't even cross their mind. When they think of milk quality, they want to know that the cows were treated well, they had a good life, that the dairyman took care of that cow the best that they could. I don't necessarily have an opinion on this. I have a dairy that's building a guided cow traffic facility right now, so it might be hypocritical for me to weigh in, but I think we need to consider what the ethics of systems like that are. Is there a benefit to the cow? Can we justify it from that standpoint? Or is the only benefit to us, and we're impacting the cow only for our benefit? With that, that's the end of session 1. I'll give you a reprieve for coffee, and then questions now, questions later. I'll stick around for a little bit after the final presentation. I do have to fly out. Apologize for that, but I'll be around till lunch, so.